I'm Toni Esselin.
And I'm Aimee Bernard.
And we are here to help make it make sense.
This is the podcast that takes complicated science and breaks it down into easy to understand language.
So buckle up, buttercups. You are in for a bumpy ride. Hi, everyone. We are back. I missed you. It's been like 3 weeks.
I know. It's been a long time. It was my fault.
Oh, no. Never your fault. That's never your fault. Let's just blame the Bambinos, our children.
Yeah, it is. It's our children. It's our progeny. They are. They are at different ages, yet we are finding that there will be problems or things that arise at all ages, whether 4 or 17.
There you go. There you go. Just warning our listeners, you may hear my child screaming for me in the background. Don't worry about it. He's fine.
Yes, he is absolutely fine. That is normal.
That's right.
He gets very excited.
Awesome. This is great. Okay, cool. I have this stuff up. All right.
Yeah, so
today,
go ahead.
On our podcast, one of the things that we wanted to talk about is the misinformation and disinformation. And then we're going to talk about that in general. You know how we do here at Dr. Aimee and Dr. Toni podcast, right? Like we kind of give you a general overview, and then we're going to go into questions that have actually come to us and see what we can go ahead and address. So I think that, let's start there. Take it away.
Okay. So what I was going to do first was, I just wanted to set up some definitions or understanding of the word misinformation.
On cue. Yes, darling. Oh my God, it's raining. Let's pause for a minute. I'm going to put him on his Hooked on Phonics.
Oh yes, that's a good idea.
That you can do.
Learning to read is always good.
I'm ready.
Okay. Anthony, I think, is back to lunch. So, so misinformation and disinformation, just wanted to kind of get the terms out there and let people know what those mean. I think sometimes I have sent in text the word disinformation to people and they'll be like, oh, isn't that a typo? You mean M? I'm like, nope, there are two different words. So misinformation is when there's an inaccuracy or something that's not true, that is, I think, kind of mostly on accident, or where people just have a inaccurate interpretation of something. And then sometimes people will share misinformation. This does not seem to be nefarious or thought like to cause harm intentionally. Okay. So disinformation, though, is very different. Disinformation is when people intentionally spew inaccuracies or lies, and they want people to believe them, usually to cause fear, to make people fearful and scared. And they're intentionally spreading lies or inaccuracies to the public or to their friends. So misinformation is inaccurate, but kind of like an accident or just like a wrong interpretation. Whereas disinformation is purposeful, it's harmful, it's meant to cause fear and also to spread lies. And we see both of these on social media, and we see both of these, going around in the public. So we would like to combat both of them, misinformation and disinformation, because they're all inaccurate. They definitely come from a little bit different place, though. So Toni, is that what would you concur?
Yes. And actually, I've spent some time reading some of this mis and disinformation this week. And what's really hard is that these words are actually being used as weapons also by those folks who don't trust the vaccine movement, right?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah.
one of the videos I listened to this morning, actually, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that if Dr. Aimee doesn't flip.
I'm not sure I can promise that. I'll try to keep it internal.
Try not to flip. But you know, just listening to it, they were turning around fact checking, and that fact checking is actually disinformation. And the word fact, I was like, oh my gosh, if you are genuinely confused, like if you're a person who's just like, you've made up your mind, there's nothing that we're going to say that's going to help you, this is not for you. This conversation is not for you. But if you are a person who's like, I just want to know the truth, I'm so lost, I'm so confused. Mm-hmm. The way in which the communication is occurring on the anti-vaccination sites and anti-vaccination videos, it's really hard for anybody to really process, because they're actually using pro-vaccination words against us, right? And so we're just hopeful that you trust us, that we've been able to build your trust. We're trying to keep it as real as possible. We're open to conversation. We're open to questions. I'm taking questions all the time. It's awesome. Like, I'm getting even more and more questions now since the podcast started. And it's really helpful to kind of really deconstruct exactly where is this coming from? Why is this happening? And what can we do to try to move everyone forward to protecting themselves at this point? Because now we're at a place where it's just about protecting yourself at this point and the people that you love the most. Hold on 1 second, because we're getting infiltrated by a robot, if you can hear it in the background.
I would like to add to that, while we're muting the exuberant robot in the background, that one of the most, I think, insidious things that is done with disinformation, not necessarily misinformation, because I think that's often just like an misinterpretation, but disinformation, and I think Dr. Toni would agree, is that if you watch the videos, if you listen to their podcasts, they put in just enough science, like science words or jargon, to make it sound sciency, to make it sound authentic, like to make it sound valid and real, and like it's science, like it's evidence-based. So they sprinkle in, it's kind of like I'm going to give an analogy. Let's say that instead of a bowl of ice cream, you have a bowl of poop.
What?
And you sprinkle, you put like chocolate sprinkles, or like those little multicolored sprinkles on top to make it look good. That is disinformation. It's a pile of poo with sprinkles of science words on top to make it look and maybe sound appealing. I know did that analogy take it too far?
I think that was a little extra. I don't want it. Hold on 1 second. I'm sorry.
No worries. The other thing I will add to this conversation is that Dr. Toni and I, we read about this all the time. This consumes us. It's something that's part of our profession as an immunologist and peds doctor. And there are about 12 individuals in the vaccine disinformation world. They're called the Dirty Dozen, or the Disinformation Dozen. And they've been written up in a couple of different places. But this Disinformation Dozen, the majority of the anti-vaccine movement and disinformation can be linked to them. So I would encourage some of you, or anyone who's interested, to go ahead and type in Disinformation Dozen and just do a little bit of reading. We find that a lot of the disinformation, the majority of it, can be linked back to them. And another piece is that a lot of them profit off of this. They will steer you away from vaccines. They will make you fearful of the vaccines, but they will steer you towards supplements or other things that they sell. These people have also been called in a lot of times snake oil salespeople. So I just want you to be aware, but go ahead, look up the disinformation dozen, and you can kind of see what you think for yourself. But I think the robot is on break now, so Dr. Toni can come back.
No, if it's on break. But yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things that I wanted to like tell our listeners who are genuinely trying to sort all of this information out is one of the things that I use to try to understand what information is coming to me is I say, based on what? So whenever something comes to me, I'm like, okay, that's cool. Based on what? and so whenever I ask that question, I get a little bit of a freeze, right? With folks that are not sure, or they're like repeating something that they've heard, right? So you'll hear people who are just like, I don't know. The latest that I had that I spent my morning on was snake venom. And I'm not making fun, because I genuinely was like, where is this coming from? Mm-hmm. And my first question was like, based on what? What is this based on? Mm-hmm. And when you dig into that, you start to see the gaps. You start to see the holes. You start to see the leaps that are created to make you, who's not a scientist, confused about the information, or to make it sound like folks like myself and Dr. Aimee are lying to you, right? Or we're holding back information. And it's just really actually quite insidious. And so I want to get you guys to start saying, when something comes to you and you're not clear about it, that you say, based on what? That's all. Just those three questions, three words, right? Based on what? And then listen to what it is that they have to say. Now the robot has now been replaced with the electric guitar. And so that's what we're going to be hearing. One second.
No problem. You might want to tell your son that we already have a musical. We have someone who's been our musician. So we no longer need any music for the podcast. So I'd like to further that. I think that if someone tells you something that you are skeptical of, and this could be your pediatrician, this could be your grandma, your aunt, your neighbor, your uncle. I think no matter who tells you something, if you want to learn more and you're skeptical, I think no matter who it is, you should ask based on what. Because as a immunologist myself, and Dr. Toni as immunologist and pediatrician, we will show you where it comes from. We will show you the evidence. We'll show you as much data as you would like to see. To most people, right. One graph is enough.
That's right. But also it's in particular, this particular video, and we've listened to videos over the last 2.5 years, but and maybe you even more than that. But in this particular video, what they do in the videos, they flash like articles, and then they highlight something without context, right? And then they'll repeat it. So I actually want to go through a couple of them, but we'll do that in a second. I really wanted to just again make sure that folks understand the difference between misinformation, disinformation. Understand that folks that are trying to confuse you will use those words and say that that they'll weaponize them basically to make you feel as if whatever we're saying is disinformation is actually the truth. That's what that's what they're saying.
Right.
And so be very wary about that. And then also the fact that, whatever information comes to you, if you're really truly skeptical, right? If you're really that person who's like, no, I'm not a sheep, I'm being skeptical, I'm trying to understand, fantastic. Then whatever comes to you, then you have to ask them based on what, and then hear what it is that they have to say that follows that up. If it's, well, I heard on a video, that's not enough. That's not evidence. That's you heard on a video, right? If it's, I read a paper, that's fine. How did they interpret the paper? What is their background to understand the information that's in the paper? There's training that goes along with this. And we throw papers in the garbage every day that we're just like, this science is nonsense. This doesn't make sense. This wasn't a good study. This wasn't this. This wasn't that. That's what science is based on. We criticize everything for the most part.
We love to be critical.
Yeah, we love it. And so we just want to give you that background. And then also I wanted to start this also by saying something that really touched me. I did an Instagram live this week. By surprise, but a friend of mine like invited me to do one. She's running an organization called Shared Harvest Fund. And they asked her to do an Instagram live to do some health coaching and health information and disseminating health information. And I was her guest, which was really awesome. And one of the questions in the chat was really moving. And I wanted to bring it here to just repeat it, because I felt like it wasn't enough time to answer this question. So what happened was the listener wrote in the chat, "I'm scared." And the reason this listener was scared was because their uncle had gotten a vaccine, got blood clots, and then died. And that was their experience, right? That was that person's experience. And then said that this vaccine was then taken off the market. And so I said, okay. And what I want to say here is that that's real. That's a real fear. Like, that's not an imagined fear. That is somebody that was in your family that, for you, in terms of time, got an intervention, got a complication, and then died of that complication, right? Pretty temporary, like in time. And what I will say that I've said in the past podcasts, and what I will say now, is that when that is happening to you, when you are that person who's 1 out of a million, it doesn't even matter. It's enough to instill fear in you. And that's a real, I empathize a lot. I empathize a lot with that person, because can you imagine that happens to you? It's really hard for me to just, that's not everybody. That's just you. It matters. That N of 1 actually matters to you. And so I think it's important to say that I am nobody's actually disregarding that as the experience of that person, right? But what I will say is this, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm thinking about this incorrectly, but this is the way that I think about this. If this person got a blood clot from the vaccine, they will likely get a blood clot from COVID.
Yeah.
That's number 1. Number 2, not everybody who gets a blood clot dies. There are different kinds of blood clots. There are different ways in which that occurs. And a lot of the reading that I had done, a lot of folks that may be predisposed to getting clots were the ones that also got clots when they got vaccinated. And this was specifically with the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, right? And so I am not going to say, I would never say that this didn't happen to this person's uncle. I think that it's really sad that this person passed away. But what I will say is that, again, we are in a war, and we are doing the best that we can to protect everyone. And that this is not a common side effect. The vaccine has not been pulled off the market. The last I checked, it's still on the market.
No, it has not been pulled.
It has not been pulled, so it is still on the market, but you can discuss with your provider which vaccine you are comfortable getting. Yeah. And this complication was not at the same degree with the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccines in that respect. And so I would encourage this person who is concerned and scared to continue to think about getting vaccinated. They don't have to use the Johnson & Johnson vaccines. We have other vaccines, in particular the Pfizer and Moderna. And the rate in which that this complication would occur is ridiculously low, even though it did happen to your family member. I hope that that's clear. I don't know if that is clear. I'm trying to hope that that's clear, but there is not a zero complication rate but it's very close to zero. And that means that 1 out of several thousand, several million people may have a complication. You compare that rate with the rate of folks that are having complications due to natural infection, right? Remember when we did our risk benefit analysis, that's the way that you have to look at that, right?
Yeah, infection out in the wild. Yes.
The infection out in the wild. And so I just think it's really important to acknowledge that. Like, I understand the fear, and I'm so sorry for the loss. I really am. And it wouldn't have gone better if he had gotten COVID. It wouldn't have gotten better if he had gotten, like, in that particular case. And that's what I want to make sure folks understand.
Absolutely. And to add to that, if you dig in to that, the studies regarding, blood clots and those kinds of complications, the amount of those types of complications, although rare, are higher with infection from COVID than the vaccine, which I think you said, but I just want to reinforce.
Let's reinforce
happens more frequently as a result of infection with COVID than from the vaccine. And that, like Dr. Toni said, that vaccine has not been pulled from the market. So that's just a little bit of inaccurate misinformation, which doesn't mean her that I'm also very sorry to hear that. But that, I think, little bit of misinformation probably just made it seem even a little bit more disappointing to that individual, right?
Of course. Yeah. Of course. And again, anything that happens to you,
right,
of course, that's going to make you feel like it's, I was reflecting on this a lot too, about, children, right? And vaccinating our children and the concerns that folks are having, and the act of doing something that causes a complication versus you not doing something. That's what folks are wrestling with, right? Like, that's the real wrestle. It's the fact that, like, if I don't do anything, then my child catches COVID and there's a complication. Oh, well, it naturally occurred, 1, but then 2, there's a guilt that, oh, what if I had gotten them vaccinated? Maybe they wouldn't have had that complication, right? There's the regret piece of the natural infection, right? That we are trying to address. But then there's the real, like, if I hadn't given them the vaccine, then such and such wouldn't have occurred if there is a complication. And so that is the wrestling match of a parent, right? Like, it's really hard whenever somebody's ill, whenever somebody's sick, whenever something happens. As human beings, we are trying to figure out who to blame. What's the blame? Who can I blame? Whose fault is this? Right. And so, if you gave the vaccine, then and something, God forbid, happened, it's the vaccine's fault. But if you didn't give the vaccine and then it naturally happened, it was, it's either going to be, you're either in a space of like, well, that was the will of the universe, or nobody explained this to me in a way that I could understand. So that I could have made a difference.
I completely agree.
That's that's what we're trying desperately to figure out, if we can crack the code of getting our listeners to feel like take a deep breath and feel like they're doing the right thing. And that they're not actually inflicting harm on their child or on their family member or on themselves, but you're actually doing what the virus is trying to do, which is to survive.
Right. And I think that we need to let people think about the vaccine is like clicking your child into their car seat, or clicking their child into their seatbelt. You're adding a layer of protection to your child's health and safety, that if you don't take that intervention, you're going to go out into the wild, out into the public, into that freshly coughed pocket of air. At the park.
Please send us an email and tell us, have you started to see the freshly coughed pocket of air?
But you're going out into the public without that layer of protection, without the bike helmet or the seat belt or the car seat. You know, you're going out without that protection. So yes, I agree. If we could crack the code, that would be great. This leads me to, can I bring up the VAERS?
Oh, yes, that's very important. Yes, go ahead.
It leads in especially to that question, or that you're scared, the individual on Instagram that shared that story with you. So VAERS was something that I wanted to bring up to the podcast, because this is like a vaccine reporting system. So it's the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, VAERS. So Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System, or VAERS, that the CDC, so Centers for Disease Control, and FDA, Federal Drug Administration, they jointly made this kind of reporting system. And this reporting system is where anyone can go on and type in any type of adverse event that's happened to them, or, you know, your child, after receiving a vaccine. So this is kind of the government's way of tracking what people, you know, think they're experiencing after a vaccine. Now, the one thing I'll say, so this is, and it's amazing, this reporting system, everything is documented, everything is followed up. Anything that goes into that system is going to be followed, and they're going to, you know, dig into it and try to figure out, you know, was this related to the vaccine or not? Knowing that, what I will say is that, so VAERS is this amazing reporting system. Anyone can go on. Like Wikipedia, anybody can go on, anybody can type anything in. If you know, like, let's say you get a vaccine and the next day you stub your toe, you can go in there and type it in. Is that a result of the vaccine? Probably not, but they will follow up on it. If you type in that you have a red sore arm and, you know, it's really hard to move your arm, was that a result of the vaccine? Probably. They will follow up on it. You know, so this is an amazing reporting system that I think, and it's an early warning system, in the sense that if something comes up and people are typing it in, they will follow up on it. So I just want everyone out there to know that this is a reporting system that's in place. I don't know that everybody knows about it, but now you do. And it's a tool that you could use if you want to. It has flip side, just like I said, anybody can write anything in it. It may not be related. Anybody can write anything in it. It may be related. So, Dr. Toni, what's your take on VAERS?
Yeah, I think as you stated, it's a great reporting system, but it's an imperfect one.
Yep.
I think that it's important to realize that, right?
Yeah.
That this is not a perfect system, because anyone can go in to that system and type in what is going on. It will be followed up, but can you imagine how difficult it could be to actually make the link, right? What is the evidence, right? That they're actually going to be able to follow. That's going to be that's going to be a little bit more difficult to do.
Yeah.
But they do, they do the best that they can to follow the loop. But at the same time, if it's been reported, they don't take it off, right? Like, that's one of the things that I learned about, especially when we were talking about autism. Autism still exists in part of the side effect profile because it was reported. Right. And that's why it's still there. It still persists because it was reported, even though it has been debunked.
Right.
So it's an imperfect system. So that's something that's important.
It's absolutely imperfect. And I will say, I think it's good that we have it. I would prefer that we have it than we don't have it, because I think this type of system can provide kind of some early warning against something that could be real and serious. But what I will also say is that there are some people that know about this reporting system and that will go in and type in things that have not happened to them, that they're trying to, because we don't take stuff down, because we leave it all in the public record. Some people will go in and type stuff that's, for insidious purposes.
Right. That's right. And it's just really, it's really unfortunate.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyways, that's all I wanted to say. I think it's a good system. Again, imperfect, but I'm glad we have it. Like the internet, it can be used for good. It can be used for harm.
It's a blessing and a curse at the same time.
Yes.
Like daycare, just like daycare. Blessing and a curse.
What do you mean? You
One
mean
thing is that your child is being taken care of for you while you can work. It's a curse because they come back as petri dishes, just incubating all kinds of germs and getting sick all the time.
Yes.
That's
Well, you know what? We could think of that from an optimistic point of view. They're building immunity.
They are. Well, that's, they are building immunity, and yet it disrupts your day and your night. Mostly the night, because they're fine during the day, and that's when the fevers want to come in the middle of the night.
Yeah, I would also say, when I remember those days when my kids were younger, and they weren't the only ones that got sick. I definitely took on some of those colds and things, and the GI bugs. Oh yeah, that was kind of a fun.
Awesome. I want to go through. If Dr. Aimee doesn't flip out, we're going to, I'm going to go through a little bit of the things to look out for with these videos that might not necessarily have your best interest in mind, even though they're telling you that they're breaking news, and they're telling you stuff that folks are trying to hide and all of this stuff. I think I find it like such an important thing to, like, if you can use this, it'll help you figure out if people are truthful, or if they're like distorting the truth, if you will.
Right. I think one of my I'll say favorite, but favorite is in quotes because I'm being sarcastic. One of my favorite things is that they're telling you secrets that the scientific community doesn't want you to know.
Yes. I mean, it's compelling, because you're like, what? What are they hiding?
Spill the tea, man. Spill the tea.
Like, what is it? Like, it sounds like gossip, right? And it's just, it really draws you in. So this video, I will not name the video because I don't want to give it press. But the thing is that, and I won't name the names of the people. I don't want to.
Don't.
But what was striking about the video at first of all, any news that's coming to you emotionally, you should have a red flag. This guy was spitting. Like, he was spitting about, like, we're going to bring the truth and they're trying to silence us. And it's like all of this, you're videotaping. There's no emergency. Like, you can be calm. Right? Like, honestly, like so for me, and I look at all of these videos, like, really like, all right, I want you to make me an anti-vaxxer. Let's go. Like, I listen to all of it. Like, I really want to hear what they have to say. I want to be convinced, and I don't want to judge. I really don't. I don't want to judge. I want to really get what's happening. So my red flag was like, he was spitting. There was emotion, red in the face. I was like, that's already getting me a little bit uncomfortable. So that's the first step. So now let me tell you the way that it started was with lies. Let's talk about the lies that have been told. The first lie was that COVID wasn't going to happen. That's the first lie. And I was like, oh, that's good. That's really good, because that actually came from the right side of the political sphere, right? Where a lot of this is coming from, to be honest, right? It's coming from that side of the political sphere. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, that's really good, because now they're implicating their political party, right? They're implicating the politics of the right, saying that right side perhaps lied to them, right? So that's really good. I thought that was a good way to hook you in the beginning. Mm-hmm. That's not untrue. Now, that's the thing, that It's not untrue that in the beginning, it was told to everybody was like, this is not going to happen. This isn't going to come here. This is the United States. That's happening in China. You know, like that's not going to happen here. So that's actually not incorrect. So that's the first way that they opened the video. The second way they opened the video, well, the second lie was that masks would not work. The lie was that masks would work and that you need to wear them. So this is where I would say, based on what?
Yeah.
This is a good place because he didn't explain based on what. He just said it was a lie that masks would work. We said that masks would work, right? Or the scientific community said that masks would work and that was a lie, but he didn't explain it. He didn't explain why masks wouldn't work. So that would be a place where I would be like, well, based on what? So I wouldn't actually take that. I'd put that in the side, okay? Yeah. The third lie was that children were at grave risk and that they are basically, when they are basically immune. And I said, aha, now I got you. Now I got you. Because nobody said that children are immune. That was in the beginning, in the very, very beginning when we weren't testing, just like Dr. Aimee said in our previous podcast, we weren't testing. We didn't know they weren't getting as sick as older people. But to say that they are not at grave risk and that they are basically immune is a distortion of the truth. Right. So for me, by the third time, he had me at the first one, I was like, oh, maybe he's gonna talk about truths here, right? Because the first one was not incorrect. But then the second one was like, oh, based on what? And then the third one was like, I know for a fact that's not true. That's absolutely not true. That's actually a falsehood. So if anybody's telling you that children do not get affected by COVID, that's not true. That is not borne out by the data. And there are references that we can give you for that if you don't think that if you have questions about that. The fourth lie was that they forced us to close the schools, but then allowed our teachers to have unlimited access to our children via Zoom. I thought that was an interesting way to put that sentence together. Allowed our children to have unlimited access to our children, allowed our teachers, to have unlimited access to our children via Zoom. What teacher had unlimited access?
Well, can I ask a silly question here?
Please.
Is he suggesting that COVID would be spread via computer?
No. He was building the lie argument where it was basically like, now they closed the schools and they stopped businesses, and now now they stopped businesses from existing, and now your kids, now your teachers have unlimited access via Zoom. I was like, okay, I'm not really sure.
I don't.
We're going step by step here. Hang in there with Dr. Aimee. She's going to start to twitch. Everyone.
I know.
So I'm going to try to protect her, but I'm at this point, I was like, okay, so now what he's doing though, I'm going to tell you what the point is. The point is to get folks upset about the fact that they had to have their children at home, and that was disruptive, and that some kids actually really didn't do well on Zoom, right? They just didn't. Like, some kids really had a hard time with that. And so, but it's just like, at this point, if you've believed the first three, now you're upset. Now you're willing to accept
emotion.
Now you're fired up. You're like, oh yeah, they said that my kids were. So imagine the first one was that your kids are immune, but then they forced you to close down schools.
Yeah.
Right? So like, that's where that came through. Okay. But if you know that kids are not immune, then the fourth one doesn't upset you as much. But if you believe that kids are immune, then the fourth one really upsets. Then that really upsets you. Okay.
Yeah. Okay.
Now the fifth one is that now we've forced you to stay away from your friends and family and your loved ones for your health. That's how that was expressed. So many people struggled with isolation and social isolation, right? Because they had to be away from their friends. They had to be away from their family. There were folks that didn't kiss their grandparents for 2 years, right? This is this was a real thing that happened to all of us, and it really affected a lot of us. And some people lost people that they hadn't seen, right? Like funerals were done by a Zoom.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I lost my grandmother to COVID, and, you know, we are a Haitian family, and like funerals mean the world to us, to be able to participate in celebrating the life of that person. And we couldn't do it. We had to be on Zoom. It was really hard, really hard. The matriarch of our family, we couldn't say goodbye to in person, right? So I understand that. And I also know that this is now, you know, this is a way to build up your fury.
Yeah.
This is the way to build up your fury. The next slide is that we wanted to keep people away from treatments that elites didn't approve of. So I was like, what are you talking about? And then right after that, he said the Nobel Prize winning wonder medicine, ivermectin, we rebranded as horse medicine. So now my son is coming in to sing a song about how ridiculous that is. And so here's the thing about this. Hold on one second. I'm going to try to see if I can get him off of my back. 1 second.
Good luck. Good luck with that. Yeah, so we don't want to tell you the name of this video or who it is, just because we don't want to attract any more attention to the website.
No, we're not. But the thing is that,
go ahead.
But this is the part that I want our listeners to be able to deconstruct when they're listening to this, is that he said a Nobel Prize winning wonder medicine that we have rebranded as horse medicine, that elites didn't want you to have access to. So first of all, medicine doesn't work that way. Just because it's let's just say it is a Nobel Prize winning medication, wonder medicine for X. That doesn't mean it's going to be the same for Y. That's the part that's really important. They do it several times in the video, you know? But the thing is that because something works for one viral infection, doesn't mean it's going to work for another.
Right.
It just isn't. So that's a red flag for me. Even let's just say I bought all of the lies from the beginning. I was just like, yeah, I'm getting mad. And I'm like, yeah, they kept me away from my grandmother. Yeah, put my kid on Zoom. Yeah, and I'm mad. Like, let's just say that I'm following all of that. Now you lost me, because I know that just because you are a Nobel Prize winning medication, that doesn't mean that it's going to help something else. Ivermectin does treat stuff. It does. It's a great drug for other illnesses. Fantastic. Wonderful. It doesn't work for COVID. That's been proven.
Right.
Finito. Right? Nobody's trying to listen. If that thing worked, we would be like, oh my God, here. Please. We don't want people to die. That is not true. Nobody's looking for anyone to die. Now, then there was the propagandizing of pharmacists from prescribing the medication. So I was like, okay, you know, not all pharmacists can prescribe. Number one, not all pharmacists can prescribe. And, you know, this is kind of, again, you're not saying that there's no proof here that you've presented that this medication is actually helpful to this infection. There's nothing that you're saying there. You're just building, you know, oh yeah, now pharmacists can't prescribe. Pharmacists don't prescribe all the time. Like that's not their job.
Yeah,
their job,
I would think that like more it's physicians and nurse practitioners and PAs, right? I mean, like I've never been
a clinical pharmacist can, depending on the institution, depending on the situation.
Yeah, they're just so much more rare than you would like.
It's not a common thing. It does exist. It does exist. But the point is that for the most part, it is a pharmacist's job to fulfill the order of a physician, and their job is to make sure that you don't get harmed by that medication based on all the other medications that you're taking. That's their expertise.
Right.
They're able to
combo of stuff that they look at. Yeah.
Flag. They're able to say, hey, wouldn't this medication be a better choice in this particular situation, because they understand the medications that a person is coming to them with. Right. So that's the amazing value of pharmacists, you know. And in some cases they can prescribe depending on what's going on in the institution, but that's not a common thing. That's just that's something that I want to tell you.
Can I interject just for a second? I'm trying my best not to twitch, but one thing that I think frustrates me a lot about these kinds of videos is that it makes people like us who think logically and evidence-based to go through line by line and attempt to apply logic and evidence to something that was not built on that.
That's right.
It's built on just trying to, for fear mongering and getting people to maybe buy their supplement or, you know, riling up, I don't know, and I applaud you for going through it line by line, but I'm like, you know what? I cannot argue I cannot use logic to take down something that was built based on like just a sheer scoop of poop and sprinkles.
Well, I'm looking at this. I guess the reason it doesn't bother me so much is because I'm looking at it as like, there are really good people who believe this. And
I know. And I think that's important. And I try to do that too. It's just,
I get it. That's why I'm doing this and you're not. Just
I know. I'm listening. I'm
almost done. I'm almost done. Why? So now what I thought was, what is it? Oh, then they ended this whole monologue was ended with, and the final lie, which is vaccines were safe and they stopped the spread. And I said, aha, this is how they built the whole story. So they get you all fired up with all of the stuff that happened in the past without context, right? Without context.
Mm-hmm.
Masks don't work. COVID wasn't a thing. Masks don't work. Now your kids are immune. You know, now they stopped, now they're in home and they're in Zoom and now you couldn't even kiss your mama and, you know, businesses were shut down. And then like they stopped you from getting ivermectin, which is an award-winning medication for something else, right? And then, and you know, the propaganda of pharmacists, which not are supposed to prescribe anyway, unless there's a specific case, there are specific cases where they do, but not in this one, right? And then they end it with, and then they told you vaccines were safe. And the vaccines stop the spread. Now, here's the thing. In the beginning, and these were the arguments that I had in the beginning as well, when we were talking about the vaccine back in 2020, that because vaccines in general stop the spread. Mm-hmm. But specifically for COVID, in the beginning, we had improved that. We said that we assumed that it would because that's what vaccines do, but we were not able to, in 2020, in the early days of the vaccine, prove that it stopped the spread. What we found was that it diminished the spread, but didn't eliminate the spread. Right? So now they're using it to say that, COVID's still spreading even if you're vaccinated. Okay, but they're not qualifying that information with the fact that much less than if you're not vaccinated. That is the piece that's missing from that sentence. Okay. Right. Vaccines are safe, right? So they're just so right now they're just corralling those folks who are against vaccines in general, period. Mm-hmm. That piece of the sentence is that. And then they're using the fact that in the beginning, we were like, it's going to stop the spread, which, you know, again, they jumped early on that, before we got the data that demonstrated it diminishes the spread, but it doesn't eliminate the spread.
Right.
So that's one way to kind of understand all of the holes, hopefully through those lines. Now, I'm almost done. Hang in there, Dr. Aimee, before you start twitching. You're gonna have a seizure soon, guys. But I'm gonna push through with this.
I need my punching bag. Where is it? In the basement.
I think it's really important. So now after they did this whole thing, now they interview another member of the medical community, who I again will not name because I don't want to give them press. And they start talking about like, why does it keep happening that people who walk into the hospital under their own horsepower and then get diagnosed with COVID, and then they are all of a sudden on a ventilator, and is that how COVID works? Or is it because that we're giving them something else, or that because we have the wrong treatment protocol? And if it was wrong, why don't we fix it? Is it accidentally wrong, or is it intentionally wrong? And I was like, I wrote all this down because I was like, this is fascinating. This is fascinating. Because I was like, first of all, nobody walks into a hospital. I don't know anyone who walks into a hospital on their own horsepower because they feel great.
Right.
I don't like, something is wrong. Something doesn't feel good, right? Now, of course, there'll be a whole bunch of emergency medicine doctors and be like, hold on, that's some of the things that we, fight against. There's a lot of people because of the broken healthcare system in America who end up in the ER for primary care needs, 100%, right? 100%.
Yep.
But during this time, nobody was going to the ER, going to the hospital, feeling great.
Right.
Feeling great. If they had COVID and they came to the hospital, they weren't feeling great. They were not feeling great. Okay. So that's number one. So you could walk into a hospital under your own horsepower, starting to feel a little like your breath is a little bit so short. It's hard for you to take a deep breath. You're having a little bit of chest pain. Okay, fine. You walked into, and then things rapidly deteriorate from there.
Yeah.
So I don't need to know the pathophysiology of COVID to know that that is not an unusual thing that happens with other conditions as well. Not just you can walk in feeling great and then things just deteriorate. That actually happens because conditions are dynamic. Like that happens. Okay.
Yeah.
Then then they went from, now they're on a ventilator. Is that how COVID works, or is there something wrong with it? Now they went from how COVID works to indicting the treatment protocol. And I was like, that's not a leap. I don't know what that is, but that's not actually how you leap to that. First of all, and I wanted, Dr. Aimee is an immunologist, so she can definitely give some context to this. But a lot of the times when you're infected, and I think we talked about this earlier, but I want to bring it back again. When you get sick from a bacteria or from a virus, your immune system kicks in to try to save you.
Yeah.
And what ends up happening is there's a delicate balance between killing the germ and killing you.
Yeah.
Okay. It is like a very delicate balance. Some people's immune systems overreact.
Yeah.
And that causes you to have a condition that we call sepsis, right? Where you have the bacteria in your system and the inflammatory response that's going, and that inflammatory response, the rigor, the robustness of that inflammatory response is actually what's hurting you.
Yeah.
That is what happens in respiratory failure with a lot of infections, right? Is that it's the immune response, the cytokines and
cells.
The cells, that all of that stuff that's just kind of like, they think they're trying to save you. So they're going into overdrive, but it's actually ends up too much of anything, whether it's good or bad, is not a good thing.
Right.
And so that's why you end up on a ventilator, right? A lot of these times is because your immune system just went, oh man, let me try to kill this thing. And then in the process, it ends up killing you. Right. Right. Do you want to add to that, or did I just?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that a lot of people, a lot of people don't understand that it's often the immune response, the overzealousness, the trying to protect you, that will lead to the respiratory problems with COVID in particular. Because I like to think of things visually. If you think of your lungs as like a container, let's say it can only hold like 100 cells, which is obviously far underestimate, but let's say it can only hold 100 cells. Well, your immune system and there's like a little bit of virus in there. Your immune system wants to like just totally kick ass and like get rid of the virus. It might overzealously send like 500. They're all trying to fit in there. There's not enough room. So as a result, your lungs need to have open space for air to come in because we breathe air. Well, if you clog it up with immune cells, and again, your immune system's trying to do the right thing, too many cells, you just don't have enough room to breathe. And that's where that ventilator piece comes in, is you need the ventilator there to help try to get some space, try to get some air in there. And then there's other treatments to try to, dampen, get those like immune cells. Thank you for your service. We need to ask half of you to leave. please see the exit. Some of you can stay, but a lot of you need to go. So that's
awesome. I'm almost done. So hang in there. So the thing is that with the accidental or intentional, that's just trying to get you going. Because at this point, the way that they've built the argument, they've put all this distrust in you. So now you're like, oh my God, they're intentionally harming people. So what ended up happening as I continued to listen, and then I actually did get to a place where I was like, I can't listen to this anymore. I did get to that place, but it was because so many of I was there. I was trying to get convinced, but then like it just started to sound just too insidious, and I was like, this is actually not helpful. This particular physician has a bone to pick with remdesivir, which was one of the antivirals in the beginning of the pandemic that they used. And was just basically, this was actually, the entire campaign was against this particular medication. They tried to link it. So apparently this person lost a family member, and a medication called vancomycin had been implicated as the reason why that person's kidneys failed, right? So we're talking about this drug is targeting the kidneys, and I was like, oh gosh, this is a mess. And so I was like, what they don't talk about is the fact that if you're getting a medication like vancomycin, for example, that's because you have a really bad infection. Right. If you have really bad infection to the point where you are getting vancomycin, if you have bad kidneys to begin with, or like kidneys that are a little bit unstable to begin with, it can hurt your kidneys. That's not untrue, but there is monitoring for this. Right. What ends up happening is that a lot of the times when you're really sick, if you're really sick with an infection, organs start to shut down. That's part of the process of having a very bad infection, of having sepsis, that condition that I'm talking about. That's part of it. Vanco doesn't help, right? Vanco doesn't help. But at the same time, a lot of the times in intensive care units, they can hook you up to a dialysis machine. They can do it. So like something that you don't need to have it forever, right? And they can use that to kind of help you get over your kidney failure. Does it work 100% of the time? No, it doesn't. Nothing is 100%. Right. But again, I was like, you're throwing vancomycin in there, you're throwing renal failure in there, and then you're targeting remdesivir as something that's targeting, all of your organs, your liver, and then talking about how it wasn't used to it was used to treat Ebola and failed. I was like, again, what? You did the same thing with ivermectin. You did the same thing. It's not just because it didn't treat Ebola doesn't mean it's not going to treat COVID. Like it doesn't.
They are completely different viruses, like completely different.
100%. Hang in there, Aimee. Almost there. So
let me just real quick. Like I would like to insert some science here and there, just so that people need to understand that every virus is different. Ebola is a very different virus than chickenpox, which is very different than COVID, which is very different than HIV. Like every virus out there is different. And this person knows that the general public does not know that.
That's right. Right. I know. So now what I wanted to give you a resume of is that with this video, they started off saying that we're going to be skeptical and we need evidence. Right? We need evidence. And then the more we dug into this, the more we couldn't explain it away as something sounding unreasonable. What a hook. I was like, wow, that's such a hook. That's so unfair that you started off, you're letting them know that like you are legit, that you are skeptical, you are looking for evidence. I haven't seen any evidence yet. I haven't seen anything. Like I was like, oh, I want to hear the evidence. What is the evidence? And then in this whole video, they started to weave God in it. And then they said that God guided them through their research process. And I said, that's unfair. That's really unfair. Because if you are a believer, if you're a spiritual person, that's you. That speaks to you. You're like, oh my God, I know when God has touched me and helped me and guided me through a process that might have been unpopular, right?
Right.
Of course. So now, of course, you're going to dig your heels in more and you're going to be like, that's right. God is telling you to do the right thing. You keep doing that research. That's completely like misinformed. I was like, this is when it started to feel icky for me, because I was just like, don't bring God into this. This isn't fair. God didn't ask to be pulled into this, you know? And then they started, after they mentioned God, then they start talking about assassination attacks, and that like one of the researchers from University of Pennsylvania was murdered. And yes, this is how much it got. And I was like, wow. I was like, this is, so now if you're already in, you're like, you're going. And then this is where I turned it off, because he got to a place where they started to cry. And he said that the FDA, while crying, the FDA approved remdesivir, this killer toxic drug, for all newborns. What? And then flashed the paper on the screen. So I paused it so I could read it. I paused it so I could read it. And it actually says, it doesn't say all newborns, first of all. It basically, it's a highlighted sentence that says pediatric patients 3.5 kilograms to less than 40 kilos if they're hospitalized, was the sentence. Mm-hmm. And at risk for severe COVID. So there's like criteria for this. This is not all newborn. He makes, the way he expressed it was like any newborn who sniffled with the possibility of COVID was going to get this killer drug. I was like, oh my Lord, this is, now of course, now if you're a parent, you're like this, you're like shaking. You're like, oh my God, this is really bad. This man is crying. He's sacrificing his life so that he can get this information out there. And it's really, so then he starts talking about how the government is trying to cancel monoclonal antibodies, and that monoclonal antibodies were actually helping. And then they pulled it away from you because it works, because monoclonal antibodies work. And I said, my God, if you don't understand, again, mutations, you will not understand what he's saying. You're going to be like, oh my God, the government's keeping monoclonal antibodies away from you. Yes, because if that should make you feel better, that should make you feel better that the government is actually not trying to give you medication that doesn't help, because it does, because it actually didn't help. They actually were throwing monoclonal antibodies at Omicron and it didn't do anything. Right. So they stopped it. So like after this, then he started talking about fact checking being propaganda and the misinformation that we started this whole thing. And I said, oh, okay, I had enough. And I said, I've had enough. I think I got what I needed. And then the snake venom piece, which is the reason I read this, was because one of the questions that we got was about, is COVID snake venom? What they were saying was basically not that COVID is snake venom, but that remdesivir had snake venom in it, or was a derivative of snake venom, and that's what was killing healthy people who came down with COVID, who ended up in the ICU. That's sinister. That's real sinister. So the answer to the question about snake venom is that it's not that it's COVID, because folks who didn't get, this video was only in relation to remdesivir. If you got remdesivir, there's somebody who was doing sequencing of blood and all this stuff and finding that the snake venom had the same proteins as the spike protein of COVID, and it's only in patients that received remdesivir. I was like, okay, well, that's not everybody. So I don't know what you're talking about. And there are folks that didn't get remdesivir who died. What are you talking about? Like, this is just not right. And then the other thing that I wanted to say to our listeners is that, remember that I have this connection to global access to vaccines and advocacy about global access to treatments and vaccines. And if anything should convince you that this is all propaganda, it's the fact that that countries like India, who were not getting access to these medications, were advocating to get remdesivir because they knew it was something that was an effective treatment, and it was being held back because of money, right? And so if you're ever worried about a medication, see if there's global access to it. If there isn't global access to it, right, then it has nothing to do with trying to kill a particular population of people. It's all about money. There is no pharmaceutical company that wants to kill off their people. Like that's not a good business model. That's not a good business model. It just isn't, you know?
It's also not a good business model for hospitals and doctors. Right. I mean, come on.
So anyhow, I thought it was important to like do this exercise because I want to show you where you can start to raise your eyebrow and try to make sense out of the mis and disinformation that's coming out. That they start with a factual thing. They start with something that's true to get you hooked on, and then they start to put things in that unless you are a scientist, you will not be able to figure it out. You know, and they get you emotional. And that's what actually takes over. So you want to share something that you said at the beginning of this about facts? I thought that was a really powerful thing that you said, and then we can switch to actual
questions. What did I say about facts? I mean, I'm sure I've said a lot of things about facts.
No, but about facts being you can present facts and then the next day.
You mean where like they'll have people will give us facts in the misinformation or disinformation, but they'll sprinkle in lies? No,
it was you could present facts to someone.
Oh, right. Sorry. Yes. Okay. Yeah. So there's been a lot of research between, scientists, doctors, a lot of in the science community where we're trying to figure out, particularly in the vaccine world, we're trying to figure out what are the things that we can communicate or discuss with people to have them, trust expertise, trust scientists, get vaccines. Like, what is it that we can do to help people understand that vaccines are safe and effective? So there's been a bunch of research, and one of the things that people looked at was they would talk to people about vaccines and they would show them data. So actual scientific data, graphs and charts and all kinds of stuff about how vaccines are safe and effective. And they would ask people, the people that were in these studies, like 30 minutes later, some questions that were related to vaccines and some of the science that they saw. And usually about 30 minutes to an hour later, they had retained that information and they would be like, oh yeah, this is what I saw. Here's what the data showed. These seem safe and effective, whatever. They then would follow, these are long-term studies. They would follow up with them like a couple weeks later. And usually what would happen is those same people, a majority of the same people who were vaccine skeptical to start, who had seen the data, had been like, oh yeah, this looks like, vaccines are good. But like couple weeks later, they would come back and they would answer those questions like they had never seen the science, like they did in the beginning, like, oh, vaccines, I'm scared, they're harmful, blah, blah, blah. But they had dug their heels in even more. They had decided that vaccines were even worse than they had originally thought, which is kind of what we call the backfire effect, meaning that we tried to get people to look at the science and data, but it seems like in the context of vaccines in particular, but maybe science in general, that showing non-scientists, like the general public, science and data and graphs and tables doesn't really work. It doesn't seem to convince people, which to scientists is unfortunate because that's the way that we communicate. Like often I'll be like, hey, have you seen my graph? Have you seen my killer data? Like my data rocks. Like, wow. So that's the way that we communicate. So we speak the science of, our language is data, right? So that's what made it hard. And I think we still haven't necessarily cracked the code on how to get people, like, because we've realized that showing them data is not helpful. Another thing, in the same realm of research, if you show people pictures of like kids suffering from measles or pictures of people suffering from polio, because they're like, well, people don't see this anymore, it's not common. What if we show them pictures of, what the disease looks like? That doesn't tend to sway that many people either. And I think it's because that's kind of like a historical thing. Like, you're not showing them someone in front of you that's alive. I mean, I do think these things are going to start to come back because of the vaccine skepticism. But either way, like, so I guess long story short is showing people facts and data doesn't seem to crack the code the way that scientists had hoped that it would.
Yeah, exactly. And I think because of all of the things that we've talked about, the emotional connection to the misinformation that the anti-vaxxers have been able to rally around, right? And so I think it's really important for us to say that, like, we, what is it that's going to help? Like, we really want to hear. We definitely want to hear, like, what can we do to help, like, get over the fear factor of these vaccines? If we haven't been able to do it yet in the episodes that we've done, like, if there's something we're missing, I want to hear it. And, and that's why we started this episode with the question from the Instagram live, because that's something so personal, right? And that's so if there's more of that, like, we want to hear it so that we can help explain some of those things,
right?
In a way that helps you understand.
I would also
not dismiss the emotional connection piece. Right?
I would also add that, like, one thing we have found by studying vaccines and people that are vaccine hesitant or vaccine resistant is that personal stories are what tend to drive people. It's the emotions and the personal stories. So, like, the individual who told you about, the getting the vaccine and then blood clots and all that, that's a personal, heart-wrenching story, right? And some people, will tell these stories, and sometimes they're connected to vaccines and sometimes they're not, but it's a personal, emotional story, and that is what resonates with people. But, like, when I tell you the story of, I vaccinated my kids, they're still alive, end of my story. No one's interested in that. It's not emotional. It doesn't relay the same kind of tugging at your heartstrings, because I'm telling you, oh, my kid's alive. They had their vaccine, no complications, nothing's wrong. My kid just didn't get sick from all of the things that I vaccinated them against. And that's what's challenging, I think.
That's hard. That is hard.
Our stories are people lived, end of story.
Right. That's what's hard. And we're looking for the harm. We're looking for the harm so that we can talk about that. Right. And those are the things that that's the 6 o'clock news, harm.
Right.
The first story, harm.
Right.
Like, we're not talking about,
Yeah. I mean, on the 6 o'clock news, it's like, fire, or sadly recently, shootings, whatever.
Right.
It's never like, 6 o'clock news. Dr. Aimee had lasagna for dinner, and it was a good day.
Breaking news: Tony's vegetable garden is rocking.
I mean,
breaking news.
No, nobody cares.
Breaking news is Dr. Tony's dog got stuck on a fence because of her vegetable garden. Like, that's breaking news. So it's like there's fear. Our news is fear mongering. There's a lot of fear in the air. Our world is a little sad right now. It's like really sad. And so remember that when bad information is coming to you, you're going to ask the question, based on what? And we're going to take a break.
Yep.
Come back with some questions, that have actually been asked and see if we can give you some answers to them. And again, we really hope that you reach out. And if we haven't addressed your fears or your questions, or you think that there's something sorely lacking, please let us know. And we will we'll talk about it. We'll make a podcast out of it. So.